My name is Matt Schneider, Marty's son, and grew up as a car enthusiast through him and my friends collectively. Growing up in Hollywood, the car scene was always evolving, currently to this day, and it's just been a pleasure to be in this culture as a little kid to as a young adult and going forward. It's just been a lifestyle.
So where did the idea come from?
It kind of happened the same time where we both interestingly had this wild premonition of doing something just epic. And mind you, like, if my dad wasn't in the 914s or didn't have a 914, I probably wouldn't say I would have one today, because I don't think it was just one of those things where I was born into it. Like, I was around it. I grew up in his car when he was building it in the garage at home, and my affection for the car kind of grew from that. Like, I was introduced to it because it was on jack stands in the garage at home, and he would be there till midnight when I'm coming back from elementary school, and he's still trying to do something, and he tells me to jump in the car and, do this, do that, while he's outside of the car trying to do something else. As the years went on, I ended up one day bored in class in high school, just drawing, getting my hand to make things look interestingly cool. And I picked up a little thing for drawing cars, and I'm like, well, let me draw a 914, why not? My dad has one. This was even before I even had one, before I had my license, and started drawing like, wild looking designs, wide bodies, bigger wheels, wings, aerodynamic looking things. We had a lot of access to the internet, and you could see how other people around the world were doing things design wise and the look of things, and I had all these wild ideas. My dad being an artist in the sense of, how he went to art school and he could draw things really well too. He was doing his own drawings as well at the same time without us, really thinking much of it. We were just drawing because we like to draw and we had time on our hands, and we like to see things, what ifs, a lot of what ifs, do this, do that. That'd be pretty cool. That's bitching, that's, awesome. And we ended up on a camping trip up in north in Big Sur. And he was just hanging by the river on a chair, sketching a few, little things that he had. And he does a lot of sketching because even to this day, MSDS doesn't really utilize a lot of these technological tools that a lot of other these companies have, like CAD design and all these, computer-based programs. We still do a lot of things by hand. And back then, and this was like around 2004, 2005, Porsche was releasing the Cayenne SUV. And it was a big game changer for them in the marketplace. And we were like, it'd be pretty wild, one day to have a Cayenne V8 and a 914. I mean, most people think you're crazy for putting a turbo in a 914. They say you can't turbo a 914. Well, in the mid 70s, Marty turboed a 914 and had several iterations of a turbo 4-cylinder of it. Then the 6-cylinder turbo came in. Then the twin turbo 6-cylinder came in. And then he ended up practically with the 935 engine in a 914. And I'm like, well, you've done some wild stuff with the 6-cylinder. What if one day we'll do like a wild thing with the 8-cylinder? Who knows? The Cayenne SUV, when it came out, was an extremely expensive car, and it was an SUV that had 500 horsepower, which was kind of absurd to hear that back then. It still is kind of today, but most cars, when you think they have 500 horsepower, they're like Ferraris and Lamborghinis, and they're like 6 digits. And this SUV actually was a 6-digit vehicle, fully loaded at the turbo spec. And it was out of our reach, financially, but we had these ideas, sketching, wild designs and stuff. And, we knew other vendors out there that were doing wild 914 things already, but no one was really doing like extreme, insane, just pure out there craziness to a 914. It just financially didn't make sense. You're pouring a lot of money into something, you're never going to see that return. But the point to this day, and it still is to this day for us, is that's not the point. And it never really was for the build of this vehicle. So those sketches, they piled up a lot. And, we had all these different ideas of like, how cool if we did like Carrera GT exhaust tips, and what if they came out where the license plate area of the bumper is, and like, what if we had like, all these like GT IMSA looking, race aerodynamic design looks on this vehicle that's at that time it was like 35 years old. So none of it really made any sense. and we didn't have, computer skills to like draw anything in digitally. So we were all doing it by hand, and we're like, that'd be pretty cool, like doing little ideas here and there. So as the years went on in the mid 2000s, I ended up getting my learner's permit, my driver's license, the Porsche Owners Club happened. I was doing my 914 4-cylinder, racing that around in the CI class with the POC. And it was great fun. It was great learning. I learned a lot because you can do a lot with a low horsepower car with a lot of skill. As time goes by, you learn how to drive a car that's underpowered, that you could take cars over that are overpowered, and the driver in that car doesn't know what they're doing. It was really a ground up experience of learning, how to control a vehicle without the power. And I, at some points, could go around the short track at Willow Springs without ever having to touch the brake. Not saying that that's like the smartest thing to do, because it was extremely scary at some points, but I had a great driving instructor, John Otto Williamson, great guy, passed away a couple of years ago, taught me everything, got me on 3 wheels on a stock suspension on the 914 around a few turns around that track, and it was a great time. And around 2008, kind of parked the car. I went off to college, and the car sat. Marty and I, still talking these big ideas. One day we'll do this, 914.8. And one day, I guess, I'm not really sure how we decided to really just dive into it, but he had a friend of his, Goddammit Sam is what his name is. And his name actually isn't Goddammit, but that's his catchphrase. He says Goddammit every sentence. So he's Goddammit Sam. He actually lived a couple miles away, very close to the shop in Glendale, and he had a 914 there just sitting there. And one day, while I'm in Santa Barbara at school, my dad calls me. He's like, hey, I just bought this. It was like $500. And Marty ended up selling the engine to Jeff Erickson for like $500. So the car was practically free. And we didn't need the engine. We were like, this is a good shell. It's a California car. All the rust on it happens to be where we're going to end up cutting it away anyway. So none of this really matters. And eventually when that car was like in pure metal form, there was literally nothing left of it for us. So it was, all cut away at one point. But so he had the car at his shop underneath like a rack of tubing of just, raw material for future header building, manufacturing and stuff. And it sat there for so long, probably from 2008 to 2012. It just sat there in a corner collecting dust. And we're like, one day we'll get to it. We're so busy with Marty with MSDS, me with my schooling and just life. We're just so busy doing other things. This wasn't something on our priority list. While life was occurring, the price market for the Cayennes, especially the earlier ones, were dropping like flies. They were becoming extremely cheap because they were just becoming extremely hard to take care of, and nobody wanted them because they were the first iterations. The warranties were expiring. No one wanted to touch them. And they were becoming very abundant at junkyards, surprisingly. And we're like, this actually time-wise, the timing of it's kind of interesting, because you could go get a Cayenne turbo V8 4.5 liter engine out of a junkyard, which we did for like $4,500, and they pulled it for us. They did all the labor and got it down and shipped to us. We had it like at the shop for $5,000. And this is coming from like a 6-digit vehicle, like an SUV, just a little bit over 10 years prior. And we, did our research, we were doing all these, we were looking for all these things of like how to make this car possible, how to start turning these sketches over these last couple of years into a reality. And so we pulled the car out of underneath the raw material section of the shop, and we kind of put it off to the side. And I started one day just tearing it down. And over that one day became a weekend, weeks, weekends, and then months. And then within, a year on and off between him and I going at it, the car was practically completely disassembled just in the pure shell form. And it looked really rough, original paint, original glue, just stuff that made it look so ugly. And it was just like a source, eye eyesore to look at it every day. We're just like, we got to keep going. We can't just keep it looking like this. We've gone kind of far into this. Let's just keep going and let's start getting to it. Why not? Why not now? If not now, when? So we sourced the engine up north at a junkyard. It was in a vehicle at the time that was totaled. And, we had a representative go up there that lived nearby and said, yeah, it looks pretty clean. You probably get away with it. There's probably not too much damage to the engine, but the car's totaled, on the outside. We're like, oh, that's pretty good. Let's start with that, because we ended up going to Porsche Beverly Hills, which was like the closest Porsche dealership to us because he had a mutual friend that worked there. And, trying to get an engine just from them was like, you're talking 20,000+. We're just like, that's not really what we're looking for because we're going to end up having to rebuild it anyway. Why start with something super expensive to begin with when we can just rebuild something at a lower financial cost margin? So we got the engine shipped down to us and we were looking at having it rebuilt. We were talking with our friend at Porsche Beverly Hills about rebuilding it on his off hours. And we started throwing out all these ideas and, trying to like just comprehend the amount of effort this was going to take and the amount of, ingenuity we were actually not even aware of because we weren't aware of what we weren't aware of. We didn't know what we didn't know. We didn't know what we were getting ourselves into because no one ever did this before. And even to this day, we still are in that same predicament because there is no instruction book. And, we take every little micro to the macro part of it all and take it one step at a time, which is Marty's way of like quality control. Don't do something until it's extremely ready to be done. How did we end up finding Lozano Brothers?
We found the Lozano Brothers. Ben and Mike Lozano were the engine builder for the 2010 Rolex 24 at Daytona, and their engine was built and went into the number 9 Action Express Riley car, which totally decimated all the flat 6 cars there
with the V8 platform
flawlessly. So we contacted them and we got a conversation going on, hey, what'll it take to this and what'll it take to that? And you built an engine for the Action Express, 570 horsepower, normally aspirated. We want to go twin turbo. We need an engine built to withstand 23 PSI turbo boost.
plus.
So Matthew will take you from there with the Lozano Brothers.
So after
they're in San Antonio, Texas.
When we found out that it wasn't probably going to be feasible for, one, ourselves, because we don't like to do things that we aren't, familiar or comfortable with. Like we do exhaust work. We're really good at that, but we're also really good at taking our time and taking over engineering aspects. But rebuilding an engine to a certain spec isn't something that is our forte. So we also found out that it probably wasn't going to work out with anyone locally to do what we wanted. And the experience for that engine in particular wasn't very widespread in taking it to the racing level, which is where we wanted to be. Because at a certain point, when this car kind of went from the sketch to the like real life iteration of getting down to the hands and knees of getting the nuts and bolts of it, we were like, well, how can we maximize this car to the extreme in the sense of if the 914 was a new vehicle today produced by Porsche, what would they do if they were to take that to the GT level of racing like an IMSA or the WeatherTech Racing Series? What would they do? What would it look like? How would they go about it? What aspects of, any part of the engineering part of it, what would it be? So, and now it's been the idea for every little piece of that car, whether it be the engine or just the headlights, or anything of like the weather strip. I mean, any aspect of it has to be full quality control race spec. And the engine was, one of the most important parts is the heartbeat of the vehicle. So we knew that the Lozano brothers had that experience of racing that block at Daytona for that team. And they had a wealth of knowledge. And we just felt very comfortable with them to send them the engine, tell them our idea of what we were looking for, and get it done. And over the course of a few months, they built us this incredible bored out to a 5-liter V8 turbo spec engine. And we, there's, Marty, you can definitely go into more details on all the little aspects that they created for this engine, but It just wasn't a junkyard engine thrown into a 914. It was beyond our wildest imaginations. They would send us pictures. We actually ended up flying out there to meet with them at a few points and seeing the progress. And it just blew us away how amazing the quality that they were doing and treating our engine as if it was going to go back to Daytona for whatever reason. We knew we were in good hands, and the experience that they brought, we felt comfortable with that. So when the engine came back to Glendale, it kind of sat for a little bit. The vehicle, it was disassembled all down to the metal. It was sandblasted. All the fenders and body parts were cut, but we didn't really know where to cut, what was necessary, what was not necessary, because we didn't really know how this was all going to fit or what we were going to be doing. We just knew we wanted that engine in this car, and we wanted to be as safe as possible, and we wanted to be bitching. The next step was finding the transaxle for the vehicle. Like what were we in need of to make a 1,000+ horsepower engine tame itself to actually be able to drive? Like what would it take? So after a few weeks of research, we found California Motorsports, which is, I think, surprisingly not in California. So they became aware of our project. We discussed a few things with them. They ended up acknowledging the fact that we were probably going to be in need of a very sturdy transaxle, of course, because it's going to be a high horsepower vehicle. And we ended up with a 996 GT2 transaxle. And weirdly enough, with our connection going back to Porsche Beverly Hills that we had with that mechanic, he got us into their service department, and he hooked us up with a contact there, and we started talking to that contact, and we were discussing trying to find, kind of like the way we found the engine to begin with, like at a salvage yard. But you don't very often find a 996 GT2 at a salvage yard. So that was a long shot, and we stopped looking, trying to find these secondhand. And we also didn't want to buy a 996 GT2 just to take the transaxle out of it, because that would just be insane. So what happened was, over at Porsche Beverly Hills, they did an inventory search, and they actually found one of the last remaining on the shelf 996 GT2 transaxles, never used, brand new, sitting there, never been used for like a future, warranty claim. It would just happen to still be in Germany, sitting there on a shelf. And they sold it to us at their cost. And it was extremely, I don't want to say extremely cheap, because it wasn't cheap, but it wasn't, extremely expensive either. It was just like amazing how this deal happened, because it was brand new at practically less than retail cost. And we picked it up. We were like, you know what? If not now, when? We just got to buy this right now, because we're going to lose this opportunity. I mean, who knows who else is building one of these cars? You never know. So we got the transaxle back to our shop, and we reached out to California Motorsports, and we shipped it to them, and they ended up rebuilding it. They inverted it and totally beefed it up. To hopefully, even to this day, we still haven't turned the engine on, but we're under the assumption it's going to hold the power. There's a lot of this parts of this vehicle that will be tested after the fact that it starts running, but we're trying to build it to right now where we think it's going to be sturdy enough all around. So now we had the transaxle, we had the engine. The vehicle was still going through body, and we were like, okay, well, we need to mate the two together. This is an inverted 996 GT2 transaxle. This is a Cayenne V8 block. How do you put these two together? They were never meant to be together. How do you marry them? And we were scratching our heads, and Marty reached out to I think Dennis and Randall
Ossie at Osco,
and they were a great group of guys that he met at the Porsche Owners Club many years ago, of course, through the Porsche scene. And a guy over there, Vince, great guy, he brought the digital landscape, CAD design into our build finally. He was probably the first person that we were aware of that was able to, come to our knowledge that was using such technology, which I don't want to make it sound archaic, but, we had to eventually step up our game and come into the 21st century of using this type of technology to get what we needed to get done. He designed us one hell of a mating plate, and he got it to fit. I think the thickness of the mating plate is less than 1 inch thick.
Less than 3/4.
Yeah. And I'll never forget the day that we showed up to pick up the completely connected drivetrain. I mean, engine, main plate, transaxle as one unit for the first time, married together. And mind you, this was probably 4 years in the making, because the time the engine was bought, the transaxle was bought, both of them were done and put together. It was probably about 4 years, because, you know, it wasn't happening every day. And that's why it took a little bit longer. And, you know, we're practically in tears because it was so beautiful. It's like, this is the most insane thing that we've ever put our eyes on. And it's all Porsche, you know, because the idea was you can't race for points with a LS swapped V8 and a 914 in a Porsche club and consider it all Porsche, because it's not. And this was, you know, one of the cool facets of the vehicle's idea that we had was it has to be all Porsche at the end of the day. And we wanted, you know, obviously the Cayenne as the base, you know, because that's bitchin', you know, it's the SUV. So we got the drivetrain back to Glendale, boxed up under some blankets, and we just, you know, put it off to the side, continued to build the body, the roll cage, and all that design work that went into that. And Marty just went to town on that, and he brought his mandrel tubing mentality and experience from building his tube, practically a tube frame 914 on that he owns with the 935 engine in it. Although it's not a tube frame, it ended up being one in its own right. But we took that knowledge to the extreme and went even farther, because newer experience, newer technology, more technology was available. And it was like, you know, let's do a no holds bar build on this vehicle mentality. So let's not do anything less on any aspect of this car. So with the roll cage, it ended up becoming like 16-point roll cage at one point.
Versus about 10-point on my black car. The bi-turbo has about a 10-point where all the bars touch the front, the unibody. In the 914A GTT, we're touching down on 16 points. Plus, we have the NASCAR sidebars.
Yeah, and that's one of the aspects of the roll cage was we learned from his experience when he went through it on his black car, what we can do and what we can do more of, and what we should probably not do and what we should do less of. And we ended up having like all these ideas of like, you know, what would a extreme roll cage look like? And this is just one little aspect of like our extreme mentality for every part of this car. And we ended up cutting the doors out completely so we could put the roll bars into the doors when the doors are closed. So we ended up with this NASCAR style roll cage, which it didn't even stop there. It had to be, you know, the MSDS way. So the top bar kind of dives into itself on both sides so you can get in easier when you're in full race suit and, you know, with the helmet on. So you still have this NASCAR style roll cage on the interior cabin, but it's easy to get in. A lot of these little ideas come into play of how we can start designing things. It's actually pretty spacious in there. You know, you're not confined with bars all around you, although the bars are all around you, but they're spread out. They're extremely durable. The rigidity of the car, you lift one side up. You know, when we went to Rennsport, we lifted up at one point, you know, just one side of it. The other side was coming up with it. And we knew at that point we did a great job, because it was the first time the car was really lifted up, you know, with our experience of where we are today with the vehicle. So we built the roll cage. It was all in metal designing. We were using like EMT tube frame from Home Depot to like get some bends ideas, because it's cheaper to work with, you know, that stuff for electrical stuff at the Home Depot aisle than it is to start bending pipe and then rebending pipe and then rebending pipe, trying to figure out exactly where things are supposed to be landing or how much longer something needs to be or shorter. So eventually we had like an entire example of the roll cage made out of like EMT. We ended up taking that and just making the entire car like a solid tube frame vehicle. Although we started with the chassis, you know, it wasn't, you know, a tube frame vehicle with fiberglass body panels. And that was kind of the idea too, because there's the soul to the vehicle, and it's, you know, the actual car itself still has the VIN number. It's still a vehicle, you know, and weirdly enough, it's street legal because it's pre-1976 or the year that I think that's the year. But so when the car started getting into the fruition of beyond the roll cage. We started doing the rigidity addition, adding metal into very weak, soft spots of the vehicle, from his experience. My experience with my 914 was, I had splitting areas of the car too with my 98 horsepower car. We're building a 1,000+ horsepower car. These things aren't going to last a day. So we started just, over engineering all the rigidity parts of the vehicle, all the soft spots and beyond. Things that were able to be purchased and welded on, were purchased and welded on, but a lot of things that we found they weren't made. The community is a great community. The 914 community is a great community, and a lot of things do exist, but a lot of things on our vehicle that we wanted didn't. And luckily we have a metal shop at MSDS. We can do things beyond just header manufacturing. We can work with metal, and that was our forte. And that's why I'd probably say we spent about 3 years just in metal work on that car, whether it be cutting, adding, welding, redoing, or, just trying to figure out in the future where things are going to start landing, and how things are going to end up start working out for the vehicle, because there was no instruction book and we didn't really know, at a certain point, unless we just started trying it. And later on, I'll tell you how that ended up with certain things and time deadlines and stuff for shows that we wanted to unveil the car at. It was around 2015, earlier in that year, it was Rennsport Reunion 5. We just got the car back from paint, and we painted Grand Prix white because we were trying to keep that impression of what would Porsche do if this was a brand new race car, the whole team thing. And, it's a body in white. So we did the white theme. We got the car back from paint earlier in that year. Rennsport was going to be later that year in September. We were like, okay, there's a deadline. Let's try to get that car there. Let's just, do as much work as we can to get it there, rolling, And we busted our asses off for the months on end. And mind you, he's there full time. I had a full-time job elsewhere. I would go on nights and weekends and any spare moment I could. And we got the car. The design of it was unfortunate because of the timing. It took a long time. And that's the one thing that, I have short patience, but with this car build, I learned how to have a great amount of patience, especially working with my dad. Everything has to be perfect. There's no short steps taken. He'll spend 6 hours measuring one bolt, and I'll spend 6 seconds just trying to make the bolt fit. And I want to move on. And unfortunately, with a car of this spec and this build, quality is the number one thing. And I'm very grateful for that, because it was a virtue I had to learn over time, because it's very frustrating when things don't work, especially in the custom world, because, there aren't things that are already built that just plug and play. And one of those things that was hair pulling was the motor mounts. And those were an incredible design that he designed all by hand on paper. And that was just one of the many things of the reasons why we were just spending so much time on all these little things, getting all these things prepared for the vehicle. I mean, this was even before the drivetrain was even in. And we didn't even know how it was all going to fit eventually, based off all of our measurements. We didn't know, once you start putting things together, how they're really going to fit. And we didn't make our deadline at that time for Rennsport Reunion 5 because there was just too much to do and not enough time to do it. And mind you, that was over the course of almost a year at that point. And, this is a father-son project. This isn't a team working on it full time. This isn't, a full-blown shop. He still had his own business to run as well. In a sense, this car was technically and physically off to the side of the shop, and it could be considered a side project. He still had his business to run. I was still working full time. So we're putting in as much hours as we could. We ended up that year at Rennsport 5 taking his black 914 up there. And it had good representation, and we were showing, what MSDS was all about and all that, trying to bring in, more business for the shop and all that jazz. And the car did very well and got, good reviews. But that car, although to this day and still in the digital realm, a lot of people don't know about it because it was very heavily in print, and print advertising. People knew about it back in like the 90s and the very, very early 2000s. When the digital era came on, the car kind of got swept under the carpet in the sense where people didn't actually really know about it anymore. Like the newer era of Porsche enthusiasts weren't aware of this car. So that Rennsport Reunion really did help with all the traffic, the foot traffic that walked by at the booth. And that's at the same time when I got him into the social media era, and I created, like the Instagram account and started getting, us into the digital realm. And that, although was like a side job for me, when I had breaks from my own real-time job, I would, at my lunch break, post pictures, and keep the vibe going for MSDS on the digital side of things. So Rennsport Reunion 5 passed, came and went, and we took some time off for the holiday season and really just got back to it under the impression, we shouldn't rush this car, because we were pulling our hair out trying to meet a deadline that just was never going to work. It was, we were making mistakes. We didn't want to make mistakes. We were just getting into this vibe of like, this isn't fun anymore. This is becoming, something where we're reducing our quality just to get something out there. And we're like, this isn't that type of build. I don't care if this takes 10 years, but if it's 100% right to what I want it to be, then that's what it's going to take, So in 2016, we got back to it. We started, doing more and more to the vehicle. He did the entire wiring already. It's still ready to go, but we haven't even put it in yet. I mean, because it's time consuming, because there's so much other stuff going on. We started doing other things outside of the vehicle and playing with other things and toying with other ideas and stuff. And we started acquiring a lot of parts as well over the years. And we still have a big stockpile of the parts, ready to go into the vehicle one day when the time is right. And every day that goes by, it gets closer and closer for a lot of these things. So as time went on, we ended up getting, a couple years into it, and the car started finally coming together. And 2018, this year, earlier in the year, was kind of the biggest, hands-on we've ever really had in the car forming itself, coming together in the sense of what it's turning out to be. A lot of the things that were separated from the vehicle started coming on in and into the vehicle, being assembled. And when we found out that Rennsport Reunion 6 was coming up in October of 2017 is when I guess it was released and announced for the following year that it would be happening. We're like, we're a year out from that. I think we could get it there as a roller. And at that point, we were in better standing to get it there than we were the first time around. So that holiday season of 2017, we didn't just stand idle. We got to it, and we started, I would say right at the beginning of January, he started designing the motor mounts. And that was like, okay, well, we got to get this drivetrain in there. And like, it's been sitting, let's just get to it. Let's start putting it in there. And we started to get the motor mounts designed, the trans mount designed. And, he was pulling his hair out. It was a really tough time because it was months and months of how is this going to form? And he was using a motor mount bar that he had from his 914 6 GT build that he used, that we actually still were able to use this time around for the V8. And that was kind of like the base. And then it grew from there with the mounts themselves that would attach to the bar, that would attach to the vehicle, that kept the engine attached to that. And from there, a couple months went by. Other things were happening, of course, at the same time. We noticed the unfortunate mishap, without having an instruction book, that really caught us off guard was the fact that our two main bars in the cabin behind the seats were too far inward in the engine bay. Literally, if they were a quarter inch or just a little bit under that farther into the cabin, there wouldn't have been an issue, but we weren't able to fully get the drivetrain installed to where we wanted it. We could have worked with it, and kept moving on, but that's not what we wanted. The engine would have been too far back, and we didn't want the engine too far into the cabin either. So that's why the bars were originally designed where they were. So we're like, that's a good stopping point. But you don't really know dimensions until you start messing with things starting to come to the assembly. So when we noticed that, we were like, that's a huge setback. It's going to be very time consuming. The car has already been painted. We're going to have to cut these out. And, the minutes started turning to hours, the hours started turning into days, the weeks to months. And before we knew it, It was June of this year, 2018. And we were still pulling our hair out, trying to figure out, one, the motor mount still, and two, how to get the engine to fit in the vehicle. So, and unfortunately, the car was painted. We don't have the luxury of fitting everything before the car goes to paint, disassembling it all over again, getting it painted, and then reassembling it. Because we don't have a major team to help, and it's just really him and I on this car with the wrenches, and friends can come over and they've helped too. And we're forever grateful for them and their help. So when we decided that we had to cut the bars, we knew mentally that this was going to be a very big challenge because the car was painted. So we had to cut the bars out, fit the engine, get the whole thing assembled to a certain extent with the drivetrain installation, redesign those two bars, and then how do we design those bars and how do we implement them into the vehicle? Do we weld them back in? Do we bolt them back in? And so Marty had these two roll bars on his 914 that were removable by the doors. So you could get in and out easier. More history coming back, more knowledge from history coming back into our current build. And he took the idea that you could weld in tabs on each side and just bolt them in and they can become removable if need be. But it also gave us the idea that we could redesign the bars to where the engine and the drivetrain would fit. And also, if we need to get back in there beyond the firewall, we could remove those bars, still have the structural rigidity of the vehicle if they're installed, and have the easily accessible way to get to the drivetrain from the cabin inside to the vehicle with those out of the way in the future. So it became better in the end, but it took a little bit longer than we would have liked to. So we had to, cut the bars, weld the tabs, have the tabs repainted, have the bars repainted, get all the fixtures and hardware for it. And then, mind you, still get the drivetrain installed now that we got past that hell of a roadblock that alone was like a month of just processing how to do it. So once we got the roll cage situation fixed and the drivetrain was fitting into the vehicle, we were able to get the motor mounts to a position where they were designed properly. Everything was fitting properly. And then next thing you know, it was already July. We're like, shit, we didn't even have suspension. We didn't even have, anything. It was practically just the body in white on a cart with the drivetrain somewhat installed. Over the course of the next couple of weeks thereafter, we were like, well, we're going to have to start working on other things at the same time because we're never going to be able to finish this if we just focus on one thing, finish it, go on to the next. Time isn't on our side, and we really want to take this to Rennsport. We had a lot of build threads across the interwebs and, a lot of social media on the vehicle and the idea of, this crazy build. We wanted to show it, we didn't want to just miss another opportunity. And this was a big opportunity, especially it being, a Rennsport reunion, and it's a big Porsche thing. So we reached out to Kerry Eisenlohr of ERP, and he was our suspension guy. And we reached out to him, as green as could be, not knowing what we needed or what we wanted, but we knew we wanted something very durable, extreme, to make this car work. And he knew exactly what we needed without properly explaining to him what we were looking for, because we didn't have the words to put into a sentence of like, what's the proper, setup. And we ended up having a hodgepodge of a suspension system consisting of a GRZ RS Pro coilover system that he put together with some of his ERP components, the GRZ components, and iBlock components all together. And over the course of the summer, from July to August to September, he would come and go back and forth and he got our suspension to where it needed to be. We got all installed. We had everything start coming together in like late August, early September. And simultaneously, the drivetrain was finally getting installed, and the motor mounts all fit. The trans mount started to fit. The everything just started to start coming together, and it looked, like our sketches starting to come to real life. Everything started to come together, and we noticed we didn't have wheels for the car, and we're like, we don't have roller wheels. We thought we could put my racing wheels from my 914 4-cylinder racing days on the car, but it turned out that the suspension setup wasn't made for the 15-inch wheels that I had. So our friends over at Mistress Porsche were kind enough to loan us some 17-inch roller wheels just to get us to Rennsport Reunion. And, we ended up pulling some of the most insane nights I've ever pulled on this build, and including him. We were practically sleeping at the shop. We would be there. He would be there. He was actually there almost 24/7 at certain points. And everything started just, coming down to the wire. Everything started coming together time-wise. Everything was just going by really fast. And we were trying not to make mistakes, especially in the final assembly of these certain big ticket items of what we are going to be showcasing. And the body work itself, all the fiberglass, was a whole nother thing with the Zeus fastening and how to get it, custom, all connected and attached to the vehicle. And we, like the night before, we ended up leaving on a Tuesday up north to Rennsport, got the car loaded up on rollers. Everything just started to work out for us. And we were so proud that we made it. I mean, it was a big moment just to get the car into the trailer, because that was the first time the car was off the dolly that we had built for the build in over 6 years. And it was the first time the car was on wheels. It was the first time the car had a drivetrain in it again. It was the first time the car had, it looked like a car. The doors were on it. It didn't have the fenders on it, but the fenders were going to be put on later. And it looked like a car again. And, we built this with our own two hands. And it was a full disassemble. It didn't look like anything at one point, and now it started to look like something. And it looked like the skeletized version of everything underneath our sketches would probably have looked like if we designed, if we sketched those other parts besides the major body parts, and what it would look like aesthetically. So it got into the trailer. We got prepped. We were super excited that we were going to make it to Rennsport and showcase this car publicly for the first time as a roller. And then on the way up, literally 15 minutes outside of Glendale into like Burbank on the 5 North, we went over a rough patch on the freeway, and it was so rough, it took the hitch of the trailer separated from the hitch on the truck. And the emergency chains were the only thing at one point in that brief history of that time holding the trailer to the truck at 50 miles an hour. I thought I had done something, to cause that, like the way I was driving maybe, or combination of the road condition or the speed. I didn't know it would happen so quickly. My mind was all over the place. All I knew was the trailer wasn't connected anymore to the vehicle, and we were going 50 miles an hour, and I had to slow as quickly as possible, but as safely as possible, and get us over as far as possible, all at the same time. And unfortunately, the trailer brake, although it was still connected and everything, and it still, was, to the most part, I had control of it as for what I could, the truck was slowing down quicker than the trailer. And although the trailer brakes were still working, they weren't slowing the trailer down as quickly as the truck was. So the hitch on the truck slammed into the front of the trailer as the trailer kind of slid down underneath the truck. So the ball hitch went into the front of the trailer, and it was just the biggest explosion, bang sound noise anyone ever heard of. I thought, it just sounded like a total crash. It was a crash. And it sounded like everything just inside the trailer was completely gone. I thought the rear end of the truck was gone. And I'm like, this is insane. I just busted my ass every day after my 9 to 6 job to be here for these last couple of months. Every night, I thought I just wasted all of my dad's time with all the hours that he put in. And I'm like, this is the reason why we're not going to make it, because of a driving mishap on the freeway. It has nothing to do with all of the man hours that we put into the vehicle to get it to what it was going to look like at the show as a roller state. This is the reason why we're not going to make it. We pull over to the freeway. I'm in complete shock. I'm freaking out. Mind you, there's cars going by us at 60 plus miles an hour. There's 18-wheelers driving by us as closely as possible because I wasn't able to get fully over. I was kind of halfway in the slow lane, but halfway off the slow lane as well, but obviously not fully over. The damage looked more severe than it really was at first sight because I thought the truck was no longer drivable. I thought the trailer was no longer drivable. I thought everything inside the trailer was just completely destroyed. I thought the car, I was scared to open the trailer door just to see what was inside and what it looked like. Luckily, we were in the middle of calling AAA and all that, trying to just make the situation, work out. But there was a freeway worker that happened to have a tow truck and, everything that he had. He pulled over, put cones out, made it a little bit safer for us. And I started to do a little bit walk around of the vehicle, the trailer, and started to get a better idea of what we were dealing with. And I noticed that the truck was actually undamaged. There was nothing wrong with the truck. The ball hitch was still in there, completely fine. And the only damage was to the fascia of the front of the trailer where the ball hitch went into it. And it was just a little hole that went through the diamond plate fascia sheet metal. And I'm like, oh, that's no big deal. There was no damage. I went inside the trailer. The car was still strapped down perfectly. All of the product that we brought for the show was still perfectly strapped down. Nothing inside the trailer had moved an inch. Within 40 minutes, we were back on the road on our way up to Rennsport. And at that point, we're going to make it. And we ended up making it to Rennsport this year, debuted the car, got a hell of a reception for it. A lot of the engineering aspects that we were very proud of were on full display for everyone to come see. And we were just so thankful that we were able to make it up there. For whatever reason, we wanted to be there so badly. Whoever was looking down on us made sure we ended up getting there, and on time too.
Gentlemen, you both have some amazing stories. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thanks for inviting us.
Matt, let people know where they can find you guys.
Definitely. So our website in general, which has a lot of older builds on it and it lists all the products that we offer, is MSDSinc.com. But you can find us more up to date and more reachable via our Instagram, which is MSDS_INC. And we post a lot of the stuff on there digitally that's more current. And we're available through direct message all the time.
The Road Stories podcast is recorded and edited by me, Michael Senderovich. Music in this episode is provided by Clarence and the Road Stories Project. And if you like the show, please write us a review wherever you listen. It helps the show greatly. And lastly, make sure to follow me on social media at Road Stories Mike for exclusive content. Thanks so much for listening.